The great hall of the Velthari Dominion stretched for nearly a mile, its crystal walls humming with the energy of 1,000 conquered worlds. And Ambassador Kethver stood at its center like a god surveying his kingdom. He had spent 300 years climbing the ranks of Dominion diplomacy. And in that time he had seen species rise and fall like waves against an endless shore. And he had learned one truth above all others. The galaxy belonged to the strong, and the weak existed only to serve them. The holographic display before him showed a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star at the edge of the galaxy's outer arm. And the data scrolling beside it told a story he had read 1,000 times before. Survey Vessel 773 completed its assessment of the Sol system 14 cycles ago, the junior analyst reported, her 4 eyes blinking nervously as she addressed the ambassador. The dominant species calls themselves humans, and they have achieved basic spaceflight within their own system. Kethver waved one of his 6 arms dismissively and leaned closer to study the images. And what he saw made him want to laugh. The humans were soft creatures with only 2 arms and 2 legs, wrapped in fragile skin that could be cut by something as simple as a sharp rock. And they required a narrow range of temperatures to survive. And they needed to consume food and water constantly just to keep their bodies functioning. And their average lifespan was barely 80 years. "Show me their technology," he commanded. The display shifted to show primitive rockets burning chemical fuel, and clumsy satellites orbiting their homeworld, and a few scattered outposts on their nearest moon and neighboring planet. And Kethver felt a familiar contempt rising in his chest. They have been a spacefaring species for less than 200 of their years, the analyst continued. And in that time, they have managed to establish only minor colonies within their own system. And their fastest ships would take years to reach even the nearest star. Weapons capability? Nuclear fission and fusion devices, ambassador, along with basic kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives. And none of their weapons would be capable of penetrating even the weakest Dominion shield. Kethver turned to face the Dominion Council, 12 ancient beings who had guided their civilization for millennia. And he spread his arms wide in a gesture of confident dismissal. Honored council members, I have reviewed the data extensively, and my recommendation is clear. This species poses no threat to Dominion interests, and they are not worth the resources required for conquest or subjugation at this time. High Counselor Yemra leaned forward on her throne, her silver scales catching the light, and her voice echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. You recommend we ignore them entirely, Ambassador? I recommend we classify them as Grade 7, Honored Counselor. And that means pre-contact protocols with reassessment scheduled for 300 cycles from now. And by that time, they will have either destroyed themselves or advanced to a point where they might be useful as a labor species. A murmur of agreement rippled through the council chamber, and Kethver allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. And he had made hundreds of such assessments during his career. And he was never wrong. The junior analyst shifted uncomfortably at her station, and she had noticed something in the data that troubled her. But she was young and inexperienced, and the ambassador was legendary for his accurate assessments. So she kept her mouth shut, but the detail nagged at her like a splinter buried beneath the skin. The humans had gone from wooden aircraft that could barely stay aloft to walking on the surface of another world in less than 70 of their short years. And no other species in the Dominion's vast records had ever shown that rate of technological advancement. And no other species had ever compressed thousands of years of development into a single lifetime. She thought about mentioning it, about raising her hand and speaking up, but then she imagined the ambassador's contempt and the council's dismissal. And she decided that she was probably seeing patterns where none existed after all. What could such a primitive species possibly do that would matter to the mighty Velthari Dominion? The council voted unanimously to accept Kethvaris' recommendation, and the file on humanity was sealed and archived. And the great civilization that had conquered 10,000 worlds turned its attention to more pressing matters. On the blue planet called Earth, the humans continued their chaotic existence, fighting their small wars and building their primitive machines and dreaming their impossible dreams, completely unaware that they had been judged and found wanting by beings who considered themselves masters of the galaxy. But the humans had a quality that the Dominion surveys had failed to measure, something that could not be captured in data about weapon systems and spacecraft engines. And it was something that lived in the hearts of creatures who would spend millions of years as prey on a dangerous world. It was stubbornness. It was the refusal to accept that anything was impossible. It was the burning need to look at the stars and say, "We will go there," even when every rational calculation said they could not. And while the Dominion forgot about the primitive species on the unremarkable planet, the humans did what they had always done. They watched and they learned. And they waded deep in the archives of Earth's most secret facilities. Analysts studied the strange energy signatures that Dominion survey vessels had left behind. And engineers puzzled over fragments of alien technology that had fallen from the sky. And scientists asked questions that would have seemed like madness to anyone else. If they can do it, one researcher whispered to another in a laboratory buried beneath a mountain, then so can we. And far away in the crystal halls of the Dominion, Ambassador Kethvar accepted congratulations for another successful assessment, and never once considered that he might have made the greatest mistake in the history of his civilization. The humans were primitive. After all, everyone knew that everyone was certain, and certainty, as the Dominion would eventually learn, was the most dangerous form of blindness in a universe full of surprises. 80 years passed like the blink of an eye for a civilization that measured time in millennia. And the Velthari Dominion continued its endless expansion across the galaxy, swallowing worlds and species with the casual ease of a creature that had never known defeat. Fleet Commander Istal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominance, and gazed out at the stars with the quiet confidence of a predator who knew he was at the top of every food chain that mattered. His orders were simple: proceed to the human-controlled systems at the edge of Dominion space, establish military superiority, and negotiate terms of tribute and submission. And the whole operation was expected to take no more than 30 cycles. Commander, we are approaching the first human colony, his tactical officer reported. Their defense fleet is moving to intercept. Istal allowed himself a thin smile as he studied the enemy formation on his display. And what he saw confirmed everything the intelligence reports had promised. The human ships were small and slow, built from primitive alloys and powered by fusion reactors that the Dominion had abandoned centuries ago. And their weapons were laughable: kinetic projectiles and basic plasma cannons that would splash harmlessly against Dominion shields. How many vessels? He asked. 47, Commander. And they appear to be the entirety of this system's defense force. And we have 200, Istal replied. This will not take long, and signal the fleet to assume standard conquest formation. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted less than 4 hours. Human ships exploded in bright flowers of light as Dominion weapons tore through their hulls like claws through paper, and human pilots died by the thousands in the cold void of space. And not a single Dominion vessel suffered more than minor shield damage. Istal watched the slaughter with professional detachment, and he felt no joy in such an easy victory. Only mild disappointment that the humans had not provided more of a challenge. Secure the orbital approaches to the colony, he ordered, and open a communication channel to their planetary government. The face that appeared on his display was a human female, with dark skin and eyes that burned with something Istal did not recognize. And she listened in silence as he delivered the Dominion's demands. Your defense fleet has been destroyed, and your system is now under Dominion control. Estelle declared, you will surrender unconditionally, and you will provide 30% of all resources produced in this system as tribute to the Dominion. And you will submit your population to genetic cataloging for potential conscription into Dominion service forces. The human female stared at him for a long moment, and then she spoke a single word, no. Estelle blinked in surprise, and for a moment he thought he must have misheard. I do not think you understand your situation, he said slowly. Your fleet is gone, and your planet lies defenseless beneath my guns. And you have no choice but to accept our terms. We understand our situation perfectly, the human replied. And our answer is no, and it will always be no. Estelle felt a flicker of irritation, and he reminded himself that primitive species often required demonstrations before they accepted the reality of their defeat. Very well, he said coldly. You have made your choice, and your people will suffer for it. He cut the communication and turned to his weapons officer. Target the smallest human colony in this system, the mining settlement on the fourth moon, and reduce it to rubble. And let them see what happens to those who defy the Dominion. The orbital bombardment was swift and merciless, and in minutes the mining colony was nothing but smoking craters and twisted metal. And 12,000 humans died in fire and destruction. Estelle expected terror, expected pleas for mercy, expected the immediate surrender that always followed such demonstrations. Instead, he received silence. The humans did not respond to his communications, and their remaining settlements went dark. And strange quiet fell over the conquered system that made Estelle feel oddly unsettled. They are in shock, his first officer suggested. They need time to process what has happened, and by morning they will be begging for terms. Estelle nodded and decided that his officer was probably right, and he ordered the fleet to maintain position while he retired to his quarters for rest. He had conquered dozens of worlds in his career, and this one would be no different. And the humans would learn their place just as both every other primitive species had learned before them. The commander sealed his door and dimmed the lights and settled into the comfortable embrace of his sleeping pod. And he closed his eyes with the absolute certainty that victory was already his in his dreams. He saw medals and promotions and the grateful praise of the Dominion Council, and he smiled in his sleep as he imagined his triumphant return home. He never felt the strange energy field that swept through his ship at 0341 hours. And he never heard the soft hum of technology that the Dominion had never imagined. And he never saw the lights flicker and die as systems far beyond his understanding took control of everything he thought he owned fleet. Commander Estelle went to sleep as the master of 200 warships and 40,000 crew members, confident that he held the fate of an entire species in his hands. He never woke up, and across the human systems, on a dozen worlds and stations and hidden bases, people who had been dismissed as primitive looked up at the stars and smiled. The Dominion had made its move. Now it was humanity's turn. The message arrived at the Dominion High Command at precisely 0347 hours. And it was the most routine transmission imaginable. Fleet Commander Estelle reporting that all systems were functioning normally, and that the pacification of the human colonies was proceeding exactly as planned 6 minutes later. The quantum signature of 200 Dominion warships simply ceased to exist, not destroyed, because the energy release from 200 ships being destroyed would have lit up sensors across half the sector, and not jumped to faster-than-light travel, because their drive signatures would have been detected and not disabled. Because even dead ships leave traces in the void. The fleet was simply gone, as if it had never existed at all. High Ambassador Kethfer stood in the command center and stared at the empty space on the tactical display, where 200 ships should have been. And for the first time in his 300 years of life, He felt his blood run cold. "Check the sensors again," he commanded. "There must be an error. We have checked 17 times. "Hi, Ambassador," the tactical officer replied, her voice trembling. "The ships are not there, and we cannot detect any debris or energy signatures or distress signals. And it is as if they simply vanished." "Ships do not vanish," Kethver snapped. "Ships are destroyed or captured or disabled. And ships do not simply cease to exist." But the empty display mocked his certainty. And the silence from the human system stretched on and on and on. The Dominion Council convened an emergency session that lasted for 3 days. And in that time, the greatest minds of a civilization that had conquered 10,000 worlds proposed 17 different theories to explain what had happened. Some suggested that Estel had encountered a natural phenomenon, a spatial anomaly or quantum fluctuation that has destroyed his fleet instantly. And others proposed that the humans had developed some kind of weapon so powerful that it could vaporize 200 ships without leaving any trace. And still others whispered about ancient technologies from species long extinct that might have fallen into human hands. None of the theories made sense, and none of them could be tested, and the truth remained as elusive as smoke in the wind. "We must send another fleet," War Master Krulvos declared, his scarred face twisted with anger. "A larger force with better sensors and more powerful weapons. And we will find out what happened to Estel, and we will crush these primitive creatures once and for all." Kethver wanted to argue, wanted to suggest caution, but he could see the fear in the eyes of the council members. And he knew that fear would soon turn to rage if left unchecked. The second fleet departed 30 cycles later. 400 of the Dominion's most advanced warships carrying 80,000 crew members and equipped with every sensor and countermeasure that Dominion science could provide. Fleet Commander Dashmir was a veteran of 100 campaigns, and she approached the human systems with extreme caution. And she ordered her ships to spread out across a vast area of space so that no single attack could catch them all. Her sensors swept the void in every direction, searching for threats, searching for answers, searching for any sign of what had happened to Estal's fleet. She found nothing. The human systems appeared exactly as the intelligence reports described. Primitive colonies, basic infrastructure, no sign of advanced weapons or hidden defenses. And the humans themselves went about their daily lives as if nothing unusual had happened. "This makes no sense," Dashmir muttered as she studied the data. Where did they hide the weapon? And how did they deploy it without leaving any trace? She ordered her fleet to hold position at the edge of the system while she analyzed the situation. And she sent probe after probe into human space, searching for answers. The probes found nothing. Days passed, and then weeks. And Dashmir began to wonder if perhaps the first fleet had been destroyed by some natural disaster, some cosmic accident that had nothing to do with the humans at all. And then, at 0341 hours on the 32nd day of her mission, Fleet Commander Dashmir felt a strange tingling sensation wash over her ship. And the lights flickered once, twice, 3 times. And she had just enough time to wonder what was happening before the world went dark. The second fleet vanished in exactly the same way as the first. And once again, the sensors of the Dominion detected nothing. No weapons fire, no explosions, no energy signatures of any kind. 400 ships and 80,000 souls gone without a trace. Kethver received the news in his private chambers, and he sat in silence for a long time, staring at the wall as the implications sank into his mind like poison into a wound. 600 ships lost to an enemy they could not see, could not detect, could not fight, and the Dominion still had no idea how it was happening. He requested an audience with the humans, and to his surprise they agreed. The human diplomat who appeared on his display was a middle-aged man with gray hair and calm eyes. And he listened politely as Kethver demanded explanations and threatened consequences and invoked treaties that the humans had never signed. When Kethver finally ran out of words, the human smiled gently and spread his hands in a gesture of innocent confusion. "I am sorry, High Ambassador, but we do not know what you are talking about," he said. "Your fleets entered our space and then disappeared, and we assumed they had returned home. And we have no information about what might have happened to them. You expect me to believe that?" "I expect nothing, High Ambassador, and I am simply telling you what we know." Which is nothing. The communication ended, and Kethver sat alone in the darkness of his chamber. And for the first time in 12,000 years of Dominion history, the masters of the galaxy felt something they had almost forgotten existed: fear. The humans smiled their innocent smiles and claimed their innocent ignorance. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, 600 ships full of Dominion citizens had vanished as completely as if they had never been born. And in the halls of power and the chambers of command, the leaders of the mightiest civilization in the known universe began to wonder if they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. High Ambassador Kethver volunteered for the mission that everyone else in the Dominion considered suicide, and he did so not because he was brave, but because he was old and he was tired, and he needed to know the truth before he died. The council tried to dissuade him, warning that the humans would surely kill him or capture him or make him disappear like all the others. But Kethver simply smiled and said that if he was going to vanish, he would at least vanish with answers. His shuttle crossed into human space alone and unarmed, broadcasting peaceful intentions on every frequency, and the humans guided him to a small station orbiting their homeworld, a station that looked fragile and primitive compared to the gleaming structures of the Dominion, but Kethver had learned to distrust appearances when it came to humanity. The delegation that met him was not what he expected. Number generals in military uniforms. No scientists with cold eyes and calculating minds. Just 3 ordinary-looking humans who offered him a hot drink called coffee and spoke with the casual ease of friends. Meeting for conversation, the eldest was a woman with gray hair and kind eyes, and she introduced herself as Director Chun, and she gestured for Kethver to sit in a chair that had been modified to accommodate his 6-armed form. "I am not here for pleasantries," Kethver said bluntly. "I am here for answers, and I am prepared to die to get them. So do not waste my time with lies and deflections, Director." Chun smiled and set down her cup and folded her hands on the table. "I respect your directness, Ambassador, so I will be direct in return. And I will tell you things that I have not told anyone outside this room. And I will trust you to carry these truths back to your people." Kethver felt his heart beating faster, and he leaned forward to listen. 80 years ago, your survey vessels came to our system and scanned our planet and our people. And your ambassador at the time declared us primitive and unworthy of attention. And your council voted to ignore us until we either destroyed ourselves or became useful as slaves. "I remember," Kethver said quietly. "I was that ambassador." "I know," Director Chun replied. "And I do not blame you for your assessment, because by your standards, we were primitive. And our ships were slow, and our weapons were weak, and our lifespans were short." She paused and looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than her face. "But you made a mistake, Ambassador, a mistake that every powerful civilization makes when it looks at creatures it considers inferior. And the mistake was this: you assumed that primitive meant stupid." Kethver said nothing, and Director Chun continued, "We knew you were watching us, Ambassador, and we found the fragments of technology your probes left behind. And we decoded your transmissions, and we studied your ships, and we learned everything we could about the mighty Dominion that had dismissed us as worthless. You were spying on us. We were surviving, Ambassador, which is what primitive creatures do. And we spent 80 years preparing for the day when you would return. And when your fleet commander Istel arrived with his 200 ships and his demands for submission, we were ready. Kethver felt a chill spreading through his body. What did you do to them? Director Chun smiled, and it was not a cruel smile. But it was not a kind one either. Your species evolved as apex predators. Ambassador, at the top of your food chain from the very beginning, and you conquered through strength and technology and overwhelming force. And you have never had to learn what we learned during millions of years as prey on a dangerous world. And what did you learn? That the prey which survives is the prey that adapts faster than the predator can chase. And that the weak creature who thinks quickly will always defeat the strong creature, who thinks it has already won. She leaned forward, and her eyes locked onto his. We did not destroy your fleets, Ambassador, and we did not kill your people. And we did not use some terrible weapon to vaporize them from existence. Then what? We took them. The words hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Every ship, every crew member, every piece of equipment. We simply reached out and took them, and they are alive right now. Confused and contained, but very much alive. And your technology is being studied at 14 different facilities across human space. And your people are being interviewed by our researchers. Kethver felt his secondary heart stutter. That is impossible. And our crews would have fought, would have resisted, would have done something. They did nothing because they never had the chance, Director Chun said. They went to sleep on ships they controlled, and they woke up in cells they did not. And there was no battle because we did not give them one. And there was no warning because we did not need to give one. She sat back and looked at him with something that might have been pity. The primitive species you planned to harvest just captured 600 of your most advanced warships without firing a single shot. And we did it because we spent 80 years thinking about nothing else. And we did it because survival is the only thing we have ever truly cared about. Kethver sat in stunned silence, trying to process what he had heard, trying to understand how everything he had believed could be so completely wrong. Why are you telling me this? He finally asked. Because you are going to go home, Ambassador. And you are going to deliver a message to your council and your people and your entire civilization. Director Chun stood and walked to the window, where the blue curve of Earth hung in the darkness like a jewel. We remember being prey, Ambassador. And we remember the fear of being hunted by things bigger and stronger and faster than ourselves. And we have decided collectively across every nation and colony and settlement that we will never be prey again. She turned to face him. Your dominion can be our neighbor, or your dominion can be our enemy, and that choice is yours. But there is one thing that your dominion will never, ever be. And what is that? Director Chun smiled, and in that smile Kethver saw the accumulated determination of 1 billion humans who had looked up at the stars and refused to be afraid, our master. The Dominion Council debated for 6 months. And in that time, the greatest civilization in the known galaxy tore itself apart with arguments and accusations and fear. War Master Krelvos demanded total war, insisting that the Dominion send every ship in its fleet to crush the humans once and for all. And he slammed his fist on the council table and roared that no primitive species would be allowed to humiliate the masters of 10,000 worlds. But High Ambassador Kethver stood before the council with quiet determination and presented the mathematics that would decide the fate of 2 civilizations. We have 12,000 warships, he said, and we have already lost 600 to an enemy we cannot see, cannot track, cannot fight, and if the humans can repeat their technique, and there is no evidence to suggest they cannot, then our entire fleet will cease to exist in 20 engagements. Then we build more ships. Krelvos growled, and they will vanish like the others, Kethver replied. because we do not understand what they did, and we do not know how to defend against it. And every ship we send is simply a gift to their research facilities." The council fell silent. And in that silence, the truth settled over them like a shroud. High Counselor Yemra rose from her throne. Her ancient scales dull with age, but her eyes still sharp with intelligence. "What you recommend, Ambassador?" Kethver took a deep breath and spoke the words that tasted like ashes in his mouth. "Peace. Honored Counselor, and not the peace of conquest or the peace of submission, but the peace of equals." The chamber erupted in outrage, and voices shouted and fists pounded, and for a moment it seemed that the council would descend into chaos. But Yemra raised her hand for silence, and the noise died away. "The ambassador speaks wisdom," she said, "even if it is wisdom we do not wish to hear. I will not send more of our children to vanish in the darkness simply to preserve our pride." The vote was close, but in the end the council chose survival over honor, and the Dominion sent a delegation to Earth to negotiate terms. The Treaty of Soul, as the humans called it, was unlike anything in Dominion history. Not conquest, not tribute, not subjugation, but a genuine agreement between equals, with mutual respect and shared responsibilities, and the promise of peaceful coexistence. Kethver signed the treaty on behalf of the Dominion, and the human director Chun signed on behalf of Earth. And when their hands touched briefly across the table, Kethver felt the weight of history shifting beneath his feet. "What will you do with our people?" he asked quietly. "The ones you captured, we will return them," Chun replied. "All of them, unharmed, once the treaty is ratified, and they will go home to their families with stories that no one will believe. And our ships." Chun smiled that knowing smile that Kethver had learned to both respect and fear. "Those we will keep, Ambassador, as a reminder to both our peoples that the universe is full of surprises." The years that followed were strange and difficult and wonderful in equal measure. Human traders appeared in Dominion ports, selling goods and technologies and ideas that seemed to multiply and spread like living things. And human scientists collaborated with Dominion researchers on projects that neither species could have accomplished alone. Human art and music and stories swept through the Dominion like a virus, and the long-lived species who had thought themselves superior found themselves captivated by the urgent creativity of beings who knew they had only decades to leave their mark on the universe. The junior analyst who had noticed humanity's adaptation speed 80 years before finally published her research, and it became the most cited paper in Dominion Xenology, sparking a complete revision of how the Dominion evaluated and classified other species, and slowly, gradually, almost imperceptibly, the fear that the Dominion felt toward humanity began to transform into something else. Respect. The humans never explained how they had captured the fleets, never revealed the technology they had developed or the techniques they had used, and whenever Dominion scientists asked, the humans simply smiled and changed the subject. Some said it was arrogance, a desire to maintain their advantage. But Kethver thought he understood the truth. The mystery was part of the message. As long as no one knew what humanity was capable of, no one would dare to test them again in his final years. Kethver often traveled to Earth to walk among the humans and observe their chaotic, beautiful, terrifying civilization. He watched their children play in parks and their artists create masterpieces, and their scientists reach for discoveries that seemed impossible. And he marveled at how much they could accomplish in their brief lives. One evening, as the sun set over a human city in colors that no Dominion world could match, a young human girl approached him and asked a question that had haunted him for decades. "Are you afraid of us?" She asked with the innocent curiosity of childhood. Kethver looked down at her small face and thought about everything he had seen and learned. And he answered with complete honesty. "Yes," he said. And I believe that fear may be the wisest thing I've ever felt. The girl laughed and ran off to play with her friends. And Kefir watched her go with something that felt almost like affection. The galaxy had called humanity primitive. The galaxy had learned. And somewhere in the vast archives of the Dominion, in files that would never be opened and questions that would never be answered, the greatest mystery of the age waited in patient silence. How had they done it? The humans knew. The humans smiled, and the humans would never, ever tell.